But we begin tonight with some cold, hard facts. Donald John Trump is broke and begging for money. He owes New York State roughly $454 million, and the deadline to put up a bond if he wants to appeal or a deposit on the debt is Monday. If he fails to do so, New York Attorney General Letitia James can move in on Trump's bank accounts or real estate. His lawyers, paid for by the RNC, are telling the court that he doesn't have the money, which leads us to another fact. Trump has for decades lied about his wealth and about the valuation of his properties. He also has a history of not paying back his loans, and so most self-respecting financial institutions and wealthy individuals don't want to take a chance on him. Too risky. And here's another fact. No bonding company will accept real estate, which accounts for most of Trump's wealth, as collateral. Trump, who back in the day was ridiculed regularly by the media for his multiple bankruptcies, is not considering going that route this time, despite it being the most effective way to freeze the payment requirements. And the reason for that is pride. According to a person close to Trump who spoke to the Washington Post, Trump would rather have Letitia James show up with the sheriff at 40 Wall Street and make a huge stink about it than say that he's bankrupt. The Post is also reporting that Trump has polled advisors, lawyers, and others in recent days about what he should do if the court doesn't come to his aid, and he hasn't yet come to a decision. But the clock is ticking. And while he's crowdsourcing his financial future, AG James is going full steam ahead. Bloomberg News is reporting that her office has formally registered the civil fraud lawsuit in Westchester County, New York. The move would allow James to more easily secure liens should she decide to do so on two of the real estate mogul's most valuable properties, Trump National Golf Club Westchester and the mostly undeveloped 212-acre Seven Springs estate. Now, here's where I'm going to stop for a second and break this down very simply. Donald Trump doesn't have the cash to pay his judgment. Nobody seems to want to help him. So he is now left to beg for money. Frankly, those are not the signs of a strong candidate. And here's another fact. Trump isn't the only one begging for cash. The Republican National Committee, which is now essentially a subsidiary of Trump Incorporated, is equally desperate and in dire straits. Today, we got the data on how much the two presidential candidates and their parties have raised. And Joe Biden is running circles around Donald Trump. The Biden-Harris reelection campaign outraised the Trump campaign by a 2-to-1 margin in February. Biden has $71 million in cash on hand, while Trump has about half that at $33.5 million. The DNC has about $26 million cash on hand, and the RNC has $11.3 million. A money advantage that Biden is using in battleground states, expanding staff and increasing voter engagement. You know, campaign stuff. And while Democrats are going on offense, Republicans are on the defense. Lara Trump, who was brought on as the co-chair of the RNC, has secured a new agreement that would make sure the party raises enough money for her father-in-law's legal bills. Apparently, the rest of the Republican Party can get what's left, if there is anything left. To that point, that new agreement, which NBC has obtained, means that the Trump campaign made clear to the RNC that donations to his campaign and political action committee will go to his legal bills before, you heard that right, before the rest of the RNC gets a cut. Now, there's a very good reason why they want other people to pay for their mistakes. They are burning through cash. According to the Daily Beat, Trump's Save America PAC was spending roughly $238,000 a day on legal fees last month. $238,000 every single day for the month of February. That's about $6.9 million total, which is 84% of its spending on Trump's legal fees, which explains why they're putting together a Trump tent revival down in Florida next month. And it is a veritable poo-poo platter of some of the best and brightest of the once grand old party. Steve Wynn, the casino mogul accused of sexual assault, hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca Mercer, and the pathetically self-deprecating Senator Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, and the very rich and bored governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum. It only cost you a little more than $814,000 for a fancy seat and $250,000 for the plebe seats. Now, look, I'm no mathematician, okay? I'm not a mathematician, but if I just do some just quick back of the envelope calculated, $454,000, okay, $454,000 divided by 814. Let's see, 814, 600. Okay, carry the 2. Let's see, yeah, that means that Donald Trump and his MAGA-lites will only need to sell. Hold on a second, carry the 3. Just to carry the. They'll only need to sell 557 tickets to settle his debts with New York. Unleash the Kraken. Isn't it good that the presumptive nominee of the RNC and the RNC don't have a lot of cash to actually help them win the election? I mean, it's just not sustainable because it's kind of hard to run a campaign without money. And that's not going unnoticed by the Democratic president, who has made Trump the butt of his jokes while he is out there raising cash, not to fight legal battles, but to actually win the election. While in Houston, Joe Biden said, quote, look, I know not everyone is feeling the enthusiasm. Just the other day, a defeated-looking man came up to me and said, Mr. President, I have crushing debt and I'm completely wiped out. And I had to look at him and say, Donald, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Dip your waders. Now, objectively, who would you rather be? A person flush with cash, no indictments, and shifting political momentum, or a guy who's strapped for cash with multiple indictments? You be the judge. Joining me now is Roger Sullenberger, senior political reporter for the Daily Beast, Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation on MSNBC, and Juanita Tolliver, Democratic strategist, MSNBC political analyst, and co-host of the What a Day podcast. Thank you all for being here. Roger Sullenberger, I do want to start with you. I'm just going to put up this graphic that we have of kind of all of the things that we know Donald Trump owns. We know that now the Westchester County properties seem to be at issue with the Attorney General. She's taking a look at those liens. How much money does Donald Trump have? And is it surprising to you, as somebody who's investigated his finances, that he actually doesn't seem to have all that much cash at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that's been around for decades, right? Just how wealthy is Donald Trump? Forbes has done a lot of really good reporting on this, and hate to tell the naysayers out there that they have consistently found that, yes, Donald Trump is on paper a billionaire. They've estimated his net worth. I think the latest was somewhere around maybe $3 billion or something like that. But a lot of that, being on paper is wrapped up in his assets, right? And a lot is like, that he values for goodwill, brand value, all these other intangibles. What we do know is that he apparently told the court that he had $400 million cash. So if you're looking at cash last year, that's what he said he had. Is this enough to front the bond? I don't really know what he has on hand for the bond. He's, floated putting up different real estate assets to try to cover that as collateral and has still not quite hit the target. So, one question that might be resolved here, maybe in the near future, is we might actually get a glimpse of exactly Donald Trump's, readily accessible wealth.
The other piece of it, then, to stay with you for a moment, Roger, is that these would have to be unencumbered assets, right? I mean, if anybody's ever tried to get like a loan on their home, if you already got leases on your property, it makes it a little bit difficult, or if you don't have a lot of equity left because you've already taken out loans. Do we have any idea? Does he have unencumbered assets? Because my sense of it is, yes, he has all these, he has a number of buildings, but a lot of them are already heavily mortgaged.
Yeah, that's a great question. He talks about it as, leverage. I think he's boasted about being under leveraged. I think at times maybe he's boasted about his leverage as well. But essentially, having, a piece of property that is used as collateral for another loan, for instance, right? Someone else has a claim on that asset as well. We can use this to call in our debts as well. So those are not on the table if he's trying to get a bond. That has been reported to be one issue that some of these bond insurers have had problems with. Well, we can't use those because those are already, as you said, encumbered. So yeah, we're getting probably the clearest look yet at exactly what his financial situation really is.
Yeah, he thinks his brand is his leverage, but his brand ain't that great either. Reverend Al, does it surprise you? Donald Trump has claimed bankruptcy before. I think about 5 times. 5 times at least. He's declared bankruptcy in the past, and he wasn't embarrassed to do it then. Does it surprise you that he seems to be embarrassed to do it now?
Well, I think that he's embarrassed because he is now running for president and had sold his entree into politics that he was this savvy businessman that could bring the country to a better economic standing, because look at how he handled his business. Now look at how he handles his business. I don't think his core cult followers will be turned off, but he knows that the independent voters, those that he is trying to attract, those that he's trying to make this against Joe Biden and how he handles business, even though Joe Biden has stabilized the economy and has done some very good things. How does he make that argument when he's running around trying to do whatever he can to get some money, and 30 entities, according to his own lawyers, wouldn't lend him the money? So now he's down to, when I was a boy preacher, it was nothing for a con man to pitch a tent and claim hallelujah. Now he's down to tent revivals in Florida. I mean, he's pitching a tent with revivals. Maybe he'll be selling blessed oil before this is over.